Over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up, and you feel compelled to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you're ignored, the more you're told it's not a problem, until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public.
I came forward because I believe that every human being deserves the dignity of the truth. No one truly understands the destructive choices made by Facebook except Facebook. We can afford nothing less than full transparency.
For as long as I've been covering tech, I've covered the resistance to it. The critics, the whistleblowers who've turned up the volume. There was Edward Snowden, who blew the whistle on surveillance by the US government and claimed big tech companies were complicit. Frances Haugen, who leaked thousands of internal documents from Facebook. Susan Fowler, the woman who took on Uber and exposed the brotopia of it all. Doing this all, of course, is super risky because these companies are just so powerful. And they make you take a vow of silence to work there or sign a non-disclosure agreement. So now I'm going to talk to one tech worker who basically blew the whistle on the system itself. She moved from Silicon Valley to come here to the deserts of Santa Fe. Hello.
Hi.
Who is this?
This is Zena.
Hi,
She'll be
Zena.
protecting the goats.
That's a big job. Big job.
So this is where the goats live and the chickens and the rabbits. I couldn't imagine doing this living in the Bay Area, but I built all of this.
You built all of this?
Yeah.
So you went to Yale, you worked at Google and Facebook. You couldn't have had a more ideal pedigree. When you went to Silicon Valley, were you surprised by what you saw?
More at Pinterest than anywhere else because they had advertised themselves as being this amazing place to work, an amazing place for women specifically, and that just was not what I experienced.
So what happened at Pinterest?
After a colleague let me know that I was being paid less than half of what my white male colleague, who was doing the exact same job, was being paid, I raised it within the company, and I was pushed out at the end.
When you left, you actually broke an NDA.
Yeah.
With a tweet.
Yeah.
What gave you the courage to blow the whistle?
It was thinking about all of the people who had similar experiences, facing wage discrimination, racial discrimination.
Pinterest says they treated you fairly. What's your response to that?
It took a shareholder lawsuit. It took a number of public disclosures from other former workers, but they have changed their tune about that.
It takes courage to speak truth to the most powerful technology companies on the planet. Some of the concerns are personal, like pay equity. Some, universal, like the risks of moving fast and breaking things. Inside many of these companies, there's a resistance network, keeping a close watch.
Hey!
So good to see you. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for being here. How did you guys all meet?
The internet.
Yeah.
The day before I got fired, I talked to her. The day I got fired, I talked to her. So that's kind of how I connected.
Yeah.
Timnit Gebru is a computer scientist who's been warning about the dangers and lack of diversity in AI research for years. While working at Google, she co-authored a paper on the risks of the very technology that's powering ChatGPT and Google's Bard. She says she was fired for speaking up. Google says she resigned.
Tech is growing so fast. Is the whistleblower network growing too?
I think so.
Although some whistleblowers get more love than others.
Safiya Noble is a UCLA professor who's repeatedly criticized what she calls big tech's algorithms of oppression. Bias, she says, is embedded in every search engine, social network, and waves of AI to come.
Can you characterize what it's like being inside these companies and trying to raise these issues and the struggle of that? Like, are they trying to squash you? Does it feel incredibly lonely?
Oh, yeah. The company had been called to task for years on elevating plantations as wedding venues. You would not elevate any other place where people were tortured and murdered as a wedding venue. I laid out all of the options that we had for changing the policy, did it in what I thought was a very diplomatic way. And in my performance review, after 50 plus articles came out praising the company, the kind of PR boost you can't pay for, I got a negative performance review for the work that I did on that because I was biased, is what my white male manager said. There was this dissonance that they believed that my work was good enough to be on All Things Considered, but I wasn't worth being paid and respected the way that others were.
You've got a handful of companies that are based in Silicon Valley deciding what the next tech platform will be. Are you thinking to yourselves, like, here we go again? Like, here we are again.
Here we've been going,
Yeah.
I guess.
I think it's the same history. It's just a new industry. There's this way of critiquing people who have something to say about technology, calling us Luddites. You know, a group of people, of workers who understood that new technological inventions were going to reshape the labor force. I find that to be so similar today. We get kind of, I think, marked as some type of not innovative, not forward-thinking.
And this is global too, right? I mean, aren't there workers propping up tech around the world?
We had an event called Stochastic Parrots Day, which is about a paper that I got fired for. One of the workers who was labeling the outputs of OpenAI models like ChatGPT, and he was talking about how traumatic it was, because you go home wondering if people do this in the real world, because you can just generate any kind of content you want, right?
OpenAI was accused of using workers in Kenya, paying them less than $2 an hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. I asked the CTO about this.
So we need to use contractors sometimes to scale. We chose that particular contractor because of their known safety standards, and since then we've stopped working with them.
This is a known tactic to offload to a third contractor so that you are not the one who's being held accountable.
Yeah, they borrowed that right from the fashion industry and other industries. One of the things that people feel about what's happening with tech is that it's just kind of, it's totalizing. These are the technologies that we have. They're here now. There's nothing we can do. And of course, people who lived in the Americas during the time of the period of enslavement also got up every day and got their kids ready for school. They completely normalized the experience of enslavement. I think we are, in fact, all three of us, the descendants of people who refused in one way or another.
I think it's important to say we're not anti-technology. My entire career was at Google, Facebook, Pinterest. I'm working on issues within the industry, but we're pro-human dignity.
There's a culture of secrecy that's prevented more workers from speaking up across Silicon Valley, aided by NDAs, which serve the dual purpose of keeping company secrets from both the competition and potential critics. You have to sign an NDA even to set foot inside most tech firms. And some companies are still having workers sign unenforceable contracts to muzzle whistleblowing. A former Apple subcontractor working on Siri heard recordings he believed violated users' privacy. His contract threatened monetary damages if he shared confidential information, but he went public anyway, forcing Apple to make changes. Big tech builds products that shape our world, but these practices have a way of keeping the public from understanding what's really happening behind closed doors.
Let's talk a little bit about the consumers, because you've all taken on algorithms. Algorithms are a complete mystery to most of us on the outside, a black box. You know, we know they're recommending videos or targeting ads, but how are our algorithms influencing us in ways that we are completely unaware of?
You know, sometimes I don't even know myself, right? When you're on social media and you're super angry and you're responding to everything versus not, you don't realize that that's because the algorithms that they're using maximize for engagement of any kind. So I would say, even as a person who's designed algorithms, I'm still learning about all the different ways in which my day-to-day life is being influenced by a bunch of decisions that companies are making.
Using their products is a choice, but where algorithms are particularly dangerous is where we don't have a choice. When I went to purchase this house, I could have ended up in a situation where I wasn't able to get a mortgage depending on the algorithm that the mortgage company was using. The responsibility really lays with the companies and with regulating agencies who don't understand or just don't care.
So when ChatGPT comes out and there is so much buzz so fast, what goes through your minds?
I roll so hard that I roll to the back of my head, I wrote a paper about large language models like 2 years ago.
That's right.
And most people didn't know what it was. I'm not surprised at the rate, I would say, of deployment, but I am surprised at the constant daily hype, the free PR that's being given.
Timnit, when you left Google, it sort of triggered this wave of agitation within. Now we're hearing that some Google employees begged for Bard to not be released. They said it was a pathological liar. Is the tension building?
Unfortunately, I would say that there was a moment that we had where people were speaking up, and now it's like backlash all the way down.
I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not an academic. But I know policy. And here's where policymakers are really dropping the ball. We had an opportunity to move forward on something like healthcare and disentangling healthcare from employment. That's one piece that would allow people to speak up, because if your access to healthcare, if your family's access to healthcare isn't dependent on your employer, then you can talk about harms that you're seeing in the technology that's being created.
There's this perception that artificial intelligence is magic. But what's really happening?
I want to say that in my field, there is a concerted effort to make it sound like magic. It's this obfuscation that happens on purpose so that you don't see where the data is coming from, who it's being stolen from, because they would have to compensate everybody. And then something, the cloud, right? It's not the cloud. When you really make it visible, it's not magic. I'm very worried about the centralization of power that this type of technology is enabling. What they're striving for is one model that does everything for you. You want to go to a doctor, talk to a chatbot, a lawyer, talk to their chatbot. So what they're planning on having is they're like the super renter where everybody else builds on top of them. So this is not the world I want to live in.
So what does society even look like in this world? Is there a massive wealth gap? Is there a caste system? Or is everyone happy because we're on universal basic income?
Not the last one, because they're not, they could do that now. It's just according to OpenAI, utopia is just around the corner any day now, and we're all going to be happy. And exactly. A lot of artists are very worried about losing their jobs, and not because the image generated thing is going to be as good as an artist, but someone's going to think that it's good enough. I think that the content moderation requirements are going to be exploding with the amount of synthetic media that we have on the internet. And so I feel like we'll have a lot more content moderation kind of jobs, but then we know what those jobs are like. So I'm not looking, I'm not optimistic about this.
There's a lot of doom mongering about the capabilities of AI bordering on science fiction. For the people who are scared, what do you want them to know?
They're not wrong.
Why aren't they wrong?
That's right, they're not wrong. People have a sense that something is off and something is going to be lost with these technologies. I think we will have a transformation in the field of education that will not be what we want. I don't think it will help us think critically.
Some of the things that all three of us are discussing right now are not sci-fi scenarios. We're talking about people losing opportunities today. We're talking about people not getting a mortgage, people not getting care, people have really high sentences because of some mundane, not sci-fi algorithms that are right now currently deployed.
We have products in this industry that are made up and launched out into the public, no oversight, no one checking for whether these are going to do damage until the kinds of communities of researchers and technologists that we're part of start exposing the evidence of harm.
And AI is so much more than chatbots. What are all the other ways that AI is developing? I mean, we're talking about surveillance and facial recognition and all of these other things that are very consequential.
Surveillance in ways that people can't opt out of, and people can't defend themselves from. There are people who have been arrested because their face came up in a police database where it wasn't actually their face. There's no way to opt out of being included in this database. And there are no guardrails for both the police departments that are buying this technology using our dollars, our taxpayer dollars, and then the companies that are scraping this content from the internet.
The consequences of that are really mundane in ways like maybe this app can help me track my period better than I could in my diary. So I use that, and now law enforcement has a backdoor to come and arrest me because it might look like I'm planning to have an abortion from some type of analysis of my period tracker.
A lot of the concerns that you raise sound like they align with what tech leaders say they care about. Reid Hoffman, Sam Altman, Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, even Elon Musk. They're saying we want AI that benefits society.
I don't think we say what they say. I remember the day that Google announced that it was forming like an ethical AI team. And I was like, am I being punked? Like, there's just no way in the world that the people who have been denying that their products are harmful for a long time are now in charge of addressing that there are some harms.
What's been your communication like with tech workers on the inside of Google and Apple and other companies where there has been organizing?
We have some kind of channels of organizing, but my sense is that right now a lot of people are scared because of the layoffs. So that's been my sense recently.
Should people speak up, walk out, leave if they see injustice? Is there any way to communicate your concerns internally, effectively?
I'm glad you asked that, because my view is and always has been no one should make themselves a martyr. But for the people who are and the people who are standing up, we have to do everything that we can to protect and support them.
You helped get the Silence No More Act passed in California. This means that companies can't use NDAs to prevent employees from speaking out about certain things.
Right.
Is that enough protection?
It's protection for 40 million people for both non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements. My hope would be to have federal protections because, as we know, workforces are distributed, and so there are people working all over the country right now who are on teams where their manager may be protected in California at a headquarter of a tech company, but the people who are actually being harmed may be in Texas or Louisiana or New York and not have those protections.
You also created the Tech Workers Handbook.
Right.
What can workers find there?
Resources on how to seek legal help, resources on how to speak with reporters. It's not easy to sit down and talk about a traumatic experience you've had. And it's not easy to sit down and answer questions without training.
So, is regulation the only way to keep this in check?
It's the most important way because it's the way that impacts the largest number of people. But there are other controls. We may be shareholders of a company, but we're small fry. The folks who are really making the decisions, they could step in, and they should step in because long-term their investments are impacted by the harms that these companies are perpetrating.
If you had 1 year to run these companies, what would you do?
I wouldn't put out a chatbot version of a search engine. I think OpenAI can do that because that's the only thing really people expect from them. Search is not their bread and butter. In my opinion, Google just trying to act like they're also innovative or something like that. I don't know. I would say search is our bread and butter. You know, we have to maintain the integrity of the information ecosystem. But it's not just the tech industry, it's the whole ethos of the entire computer science, engineering, you know, machine learning, AI, whatever, research community as well that's led to this.
So, are we stuck? I mean, is there a glimmer of hope?
You know, it's interesting because 10 years ago, it was very hard to have this conversation. So we know that a lot of envelopes are being pushed.
If the CEOs of Google and Microsoft and Amazon and Apple or Facebook were in this room right now, what would you say to them?
We know that CEOs, if they were personally liable in any way for what happens in those companies, well, it would be slim pickings for who would want to be the CEO of most of these companies. But I think that if American tech companies in particular really wanted to seal their legacy and reputations, they would take these conversations to heart and say, all right, we are the so-called innovators. It's strange how they can't solve these problems.
I think some of the responsibility is on your industry as well. They put out something that's new and shiny, and almost every outlet runs to cover it, and runs to cover it using the talking points that the comms and PR folks from the companies supply. And so there's a lot of responsibility there in the way that things are covered, and therefore the way that people understand them.
If things don't change, what does the future look like?
What I'm worried about is a similar type of remaking of society with some of these tools, right, that are out there, where by the time we regulate things, the society has already been remade, in ways that we don't want, and then normalized.
We are pummeling toward a type of global inequality that will be very hard to come back from, and that will also have incredible consequences, social consequences. I think of us and so many other women like us and people like us as like the canaries in the coal mine. We're like chirping, we're trying, and then we're gonna go silent. And that part seems so tragic and unnecessary when we know that there's enough evidence to pivot in other directions.
If things do change for the better, what could the future look like?
Oh man, I was just looking outside at the goats and thinking that my dream, like what I want for my kids, what I want for everyone, is work to not define your life.
So what do we got here? Hello, who's this guy?
This is Persnickety.
Persnickety, you're not very persnickety to me.
She is one of my does. Little Dove is the black and white one, and then the one on the platform right now is Rose Dunn, and those are her 3 babies. And that's Smokey. He's doing his job.
Is there a metaphor for your work in that? Kind of planting seeds?
What living here does with my work is it helps to give it meaning every day, because I want every worker to have the ability to live in joy the way that I do.
Right.
The animals make me so happy. Living here, the sunshine makes me happy, and I want that for everyone.
It can be profoundly isolating to shine a light on the practices of an all-powerful industry, something that struck me out here in the desert, 1,000 miles from Silicon Valley. But the whistleblowers continue to do it, not because they're against progress, but because they want technology companies to think carefully about the future they're building, to make sure it's hospitable, equitable, and a world that all of us actually want to inhabit.